Yes, Saket, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am. It's our pleasure to have you here with us. Though Bashudra ma'am has welcomed you, but still, for the formal welcome address, I'd like to call upon Dr. Bashudra Roy, ma'am. Ma'am.
So, yes, I had informally welcomed Saptaparna, but I will formally welcome her. So, dear students, we are very, very glad that we have a wonderful speaker with us today. I have known Saptaparna personally as a very, very committed scholar, as a poet, as a translator. And most importantly, she is a brilliant performer of poetry and dramas. So if you were to witness Saptaparna performing, you would be spellbound by her performance. You will realize a bit of it as she speaks. She is a fabulous orator. But listening to her poetry is really a treat. And there are several videos on YouTube that you can find where Saptaparna has lent her voice to poems and has completely transformed them. So here today she is in the capacity of a scholar. She will speak to you about a very important subject. So she will be talking to you about an area that is probably, very interesting and also very new to you. It encompasses the area of Dalit studies. And I'm sure that the introduction Saptaparna will give will motivate you towards further research in the area, as she herself, just spoke a while ago. So Saptaparna, we are very glad that you agreed to our invitation and you are here to speak to our students. So Saket will introduce Saptaparna formally, and then we will hand over the session to her. Yes, over to you, Saket.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Saptaparna Roy is presently working as an assistant professor for English and departmental coordinator with the Department of Humanities at Heritage Institute of Technology, Kolkata since 2011. She has more than 15 years of teaching experience across esteemed business schools such as ISB as head of the department and engineering institutions in Kolkata. She has been invited as the visiting faculty at IIHM and Future Institute of Management. Apart from being an academician and administrator, she is a widely traveled pedagogy trainer, translator, poet, and poetry performer. She is an executive council member of Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library at ICCR Kolkata. She is empaneled with UGC Bangladesh and has extensively trained around 250 private university faculty members on latest pedagogical techniques. She has presented her research work at prestigious institutions such as Management Development Institute of Singapore, with a PhD in Women's Studies from University of Calcutta. She is currently engaged in research on critical gender studies with several national and international publications and seminal projects such as the Indo-US Knowledge Initiative Program for Women in Eco-Friendly Entrepreneurship in West Bengal, among others, to her credit. Ma'am, we are eagerly waiting for your deliberation. The platform now is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Professor Saket Kumar. Very good evening to all the members of faculty and, of course, the students of the postgraduate department of Karim City College, Jamshedpur. It is my honor that I have been invited as a guest speaker for today's seminar talk. And Boshudhara, who is a longtime friend, the moment she broached this idea, I delightfully consented to it. I will be presenting a talk titled Historicizing Onomastics in a Bengali Dalit woman's life narrative. And my study centers on the life narrative of Kollani Thakur Charal, which is called Ami Keno Charal Likhi? Why Do I Write Charal? Which was published in 2016. Now, before I present my paper, I would like to set the historical backdrop to the title, and try to justify why I call this paper as a process of historicizing onomastics in the narrative of a Bengali Dalit woman. Now, we observe that around 1901, various castes sent representations to the Bengal government demanding for a change in their name, which was obviously expressive of their desire to escalate in the social hierarchy. And in 1911, a huge pile of such representations were submitted to the government, wherein we observe that the Babhans, who now call themselves the Bhumihars, they wanted to be renamed as the Brahmarshi Brahmans. The Bengali Kayasthas, they thought that they deserved the status of the Kshatriyas. And the Baidyas wanted to be placed on the same platform as the Brahmans. Now, all these demands were summarily rejected, barring two representations, one from the Chandals, who sought to be rechristened as Namashudras, and the other from the Kaibattas, who wanted to be called as Mahesha. Now, it is these Chandals who are colloquially known as Charal, who appropriated the Matua Dharma or the Matua religion in the mid-19th century. Harichand Biswas, who is popularly known as Harichand Thakur, who lived between 1812 and 1878, he is the founder of this Matua faith, which has become extremely popular amongst the Namashudras in West Bengal. Now, in the last century, this faith has proliferated phenomenally among several depressed castes like the Kumbhakars, the Muchis, the Pondras, the Kapalis, and the Malos, amongst others, and it has a population of over 12.5 million. Now, we see that Harichand Thakur and his son Guruchand, both of them were very flourishing traders who inspired their followers to be financially independent. Now, we see that this Matua Dharma has a very strong secular work ethic at its center. And this is expressed through a popular saying, which is Hate Kam Mukhe Nam, which means work on your hands and his name on your lips. That is the name of the Lord. We observe that the higher castes were extremely contemptuous of this fervent chanting, singing, and dancing by the Matuas, and they pejoratively called them moto, which means drunkards. It was precisely this ridicule that Harichand accepted very seriously, and he literally turned the term on its head by naming his faith Matua. So, who were these Chandals or the Charals who appropriated this religion? We observe that in the other parts of India, the Chandals are mostly restricted to the disposers of corpses. But in Bengal, they had aligned themselves with a variety of professions, such as that of fishermen, boatmen, carpenters, vegetable sellers, agricultural laborers, and cultivators. And it was through these diverse occupations that they became a very self-reliant community who were isolated and segregated from the other caste groups. Now, being segregated from the mainstream, and it was much later, it was almost a recent phenomena that they have been assimilated within the Hindu caste system, that we see that these Chandals developed as a peasant community in the 19th century. And it was through the Matua Dharma that they assumed a distinct identity. A very significant occurrence, which I would like to draw your attention to over here, is the first publication from this community, which is the hagiography of Harichand Thakur, which is called Sri Sri Hari Lilamrita. Now, it was composed around 1905 and finally published in 1916. And we see that this text has undergone tremendous transmogrification over the last century until the recent present, wherein we see a strong influence of Hinduization, of Sanskritization, and also an influence of the Vaishnava religious sect. Now, why I mention this book is because of the history of onomastics, which I intend to chart, and the renaming of this community from Chandala to Namasudras as documented in the 1911 census of India. So here is a community who had an luminal, almost luminal existence, trying to rechristen itself as it moved towards a strong socio-political identity. Now, I set my paper against this precise historical background. The universalization of women's experience in feminist theory, at best, has been a hegemonic approach that has systematically othered or excluded the specific experiences of certain marginalized groups, such as the Dalit women. The 1970s feminist movement in post colonial India witnessed the emergence of micro organizations that attempted to posit the particular claims of oppressed groups. However, this foregrounded the significance of the multiplicities of women's experiences, yet, the representation of Dalit women was abominably nominal. While class and religion were considered as the two major determinants of gendered oppression, caste remained deeply entrenched in the social fabric as a normative. Since experience is central to feminist intersectionality as a methodology, the development of an episteme on Dalit feminism in India has been inadequate due to the paucity of serious research on such activism and literary productions, barring a few prominent voices. The term intersectionality was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw to address the coercion on Black women, the specificities of whose condition was excluded by white feminist discourses in North America. Since the provenance of intersectionality is in the West, the application of such a framework in the Indian context has been a matter of much debate. In fact, Dalit feminists have sought inspiration from the historiography of women of color in their own struggle for an equitable society. Radhika Govinda appositely remarks, and I quote, "Whether as a concept, theory, method, pedagogical, or heuristic device, intersectionality has been enormously successful in its appeal and reach not only within but also beyond feminist, women's, and gender studies." Unquote. This paper will apply theoretical interventions such as intersectionality, Dalit feminism, and post-colonialism for critiquing a Bengali Dalit woman's autobiography. It will argue that the theoretical rubric with caste, class, and gender crisscrossing the field of Dalit woman's experience can build an epistemological perspective that can override the excessive masculinization in Dalitism. Such an effort can unmask casteist oppression on account of not only Brahminism, but also the patriarchal terrorization on women within the Dalit communities. These finer nuances that inform Dalit women's experiences are further complicated by the historical events such as partition and forced migration, especially in Bengal. Now, unlike the West, we see that Bengal has been a very porous border where migration has been a continuous phenomenon. The 1970s resurgence of labor and peasant revolts was characterized by the centering of Dalit women, but some of the organizations, such as the Dalit Panthers, focused primarily on the sexualization of Dalit women's work. The leftist women's fronts underscored the subjugation of women on account of economic terms, employment opportunities, and accessibility to the market within the capitalist state. The other autonomous women's bodies emphasized on the violence perpetuated on women as the locus of their activism. The Peking women's movement of the 1980s exposed the politicization over hegemonic formulations of work, rights, legislation, development, and their interrelationship with the state apparatus. Yet, the key criterion remained class and not caste. The philosophy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar that had established the connection between caste stratifications and patriarchy was lost to the women's movement. In view of the casteist brutalities such as domestic violence and dowry deaths among upper caste women within the sacrosanct precincts of the family, Dalit women are far more vulnerable to collective forms of violence like gang rape, assault, and physical harassment at the workplace and in the public domain. The occurrences of rape and dowry bear the thrust of collective violence for the Dalit woman who is subjected to the enforced restoration of honor by outrage and the restrictive laws of endogamy against intercaste marriages. The emancipatory agenda of Dalit feminism and the ensconcing of Dalit activists in some administrative seats of power have often invited retaliatory moves to further circumscribe their activism. Hence, a collaborative mission of Dalit activists and feminists can identify and incorporate the plurality and complexity of indicators that mark gendered spaces. While feminist movement has brought about considerable change in the lives of women at large, the condition of most invisibilized of the Dalit women had not been ameliorated. At present, the overwhelming discourse of Brahmanical Hindutva has subsumed gender issues within the cultural fold, making the task of feminists arduous. In fact, feminist politics must now be reframed to redefine class or caste-based hierarchies as well as patriarchies. Interestingly, caste escalation necessitates the disengagement of women from the public sphere, emanating from the assumption regarding the exposedness of lower caste women who contribute to social labor in public view. The sexualization of their work and the lack of control by lower caste men over their women's sexuality reaffirm how gendered constructions endorse and normalize both patriarchies and caste hierarchies. In fact, Ambedkar established how practices of endogamy determine women's sexuality and the containment of it. Dalit feminism has the potential to interrogate these interrelations between class, caste, patriarchies, productive labor, and the market to address all forms of inequities witnessed by marginalized communities. Since the Dalit woman as subject is not a homogeneous construction, the Dalit feminists' agenda must coalesce with the schema of all emancipatory missions to review and revise the intersecting coordinates of race, class, caste, and of course, gender. In fact, within the Dalit women's experience, the diversities of location must be taken cognizance of to configure a holistic theorization on Dalit feminism. And I quote, Dalit feminism proclaims its difference from mainstream Indian feminism and Dalit politics by recognizing caste and gender as intersectional and thereby identifying its constituency, that is, Dalit woman, as different from woman and Dalit as defined by mainstream feminism and Dalit politics, respectively, unquote. While feminists have recognized innumerable differences that qualify the category of women, intersectionality examines oppression at the intersection, wherein each qualifier is not an additive but a constitutive of one another. Incidentally, John clarifies that, and I quote, intersectionality certainly represents an advance over the more generic use of multiple axes of oppression, double and triple burdens, and so on, and is a corrective to the commonly deployed notion of multiple identities, unquote. Within post-colonial spaces, the balance between universalisms and particularisms must be discreetly maintained. I now go about to establish how Dalit activism in Bangla has become an emergent area of study, but unfortunately, it has not been given much prominence. Dalit women's writings from Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu have become the locus of representation of a Dalit feminist voice, whereas the latest emergent area of Dalit writings in Bangla has infused the dimension of refugee status to the caste system and gender issues. Bengali Dalit women writers such as Manju Bala, Smritikona Hauladar, Leela Haldar, Kanon Boral, Alokananda Roy, Pallavi Mondol, Pronita Roy, Sanju Shikdar, Meruna Murmu, Lakshmi Mandi, Aisha Khatun, Juthika Pandey, and Pushpa Bairagya, among others, are creating a rich repository of writings from the margin. Though a substantial body of literary work by Dalit writers exists in Bangla, there is a misconception regarding its absence that has mystified the understanding of most theoreticians in India and abroad. One of the possible reasons is the lack of initiatives by publishers to showcase such productions, and another is the dearth of English translations that could present such subaltern representations to a larger reading public. Moreover, This kind of a collective amnesia can result in an erasure of Dalit literary representations, politicizing representation at large. Shantan Dashgupta undergirds the need for recognizing such literature as quote unquote political imperative. And I quote from Dasgupta: the fact is that literary historians and scholars in Bengal have not taken Bangla Dalit writing seriously till now in any sustained way. The collective amnesia both emerges from and sustains a collective complacence. By refusing to acknowledge Bangla Dalit writing, we seem to subscribe to the thesis that atrocities on Dalits, which may be present elsewhere in India, are absent in Bengal. This is not only untrue, but a very dangerous thesis to subscribe to. If this contention is to be taken at face value, then the Chuni Kotals and their lives of misery and suffering, discrimination and deprivation will be condemned to erasure, and the fate of Chuni Kotal will be mirrored in the lives of many more. Unquote. Scholarly investigation and theorization on Dalit writings in Bangla can open new vistas for the literary landscape of Bengal, where myriad representations converge. Since literature is also testimony, Dalit writings in Bangla will foreground the social realities in which such marginalized communities survive. The literary oeuvres from different subaltern groups will uphold a holistic picture of the cultural diversity in Bengal. What informs Dalit aesthetics and what characterizes Dalit politics in Bangla can be discerned by critically engaging with the narratives of self and community. Ambedkar's philosophy of creating a social awakening without which the upliftment of the Dalit community cannot be realized is evident in the Bangla Dalit writings. Ambedkar struggled to eradicate the caste system, to posit the history of rebellion, and the present condition of the Dalits are invoked in the Bangla Dalit writings to situate the relevance and contemporaneity of Ambedkar's vision. I will now focus specifically on the text, that is, the autobiography titled Ami Keno Charal Likhi, Why Do I Write Charal, by Kollani Thakur Charal, who is a Bengali Dalit woman. Kollani Thakur Charal, born in 1965, a feminist poet, essayist, short story writer, autobiographer, and editor, is a powerful voice whose writing and activism demand critical examination in the light of her contribution to Dalit feminism in Bengal. In the poem Notun Moshal Jali, that is, Let Us Light a New Flame, Kollani Thakur Charal assesses how despicably Ambedkar is treated in India and reflects a deep imbuement of his philosophy in her life and works. And I quote, "We move on hand in hand with this new India. The real picture is unveiled the moment you draw the string. Ambedkar is decked in a garland of slippers." Unquote. Kollani Thakur Charal narrates how, upon the arrival of her family in West Bengal, they had to endure casteist intolerance and had to change their surname to Thakur for survival. And I quote, "Our relatives, implying my father and my father's maternal cousins, all changed their title to become Thakur. This was a way to be relieved from social pressure and casteist inferiority. But by changing the name, does the position transform? That has a different method. In place of untouchable, Harijan, or unclean or Dalit, whichever word is ushered, the change in status does not occur. This is known to even those who are into this game of name change. Even so, that Harichand Guruchand did not have their title as Thakur, and there are dubious opinions about their caste. They have been referred to as Maithili Brahmins. Being low caste, I will rescue low caste." Unquote. Her appropriation of the surname Charal, which is a colloquial derivative of Chandal, is a deliberate choice to counter the casteist atrocities hurled on the Motua community and to reclaim her own identity. By appending Charal to her surname as a mark of protest, Kalyani Thakur unveils the stigma in pronouncing her caste publicly and punctures the identity politics in a camouflaged survival strategy. Incidentally, Shakespeare's lines in Romeo and Juliet resonate in our minds. And I quote, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Unquote. The fact that association of characteristics and the social status of a group or community are not modified with the change in nomenclature is logically and poignantly established by Charal. In the titles of her literary works, such as Chondalinir Kobita, Chondalinir Bibriti, and Chondalini Bone, she intentionally uses the word Chandalini and Bono Chandali, subtly referencing to Tagore's sensitivity and sensibility towards the oppressed untouchables in his play Chandalika. In fact, the word Chandalika is the name of Devi Durga. Kalyani scripts her lived experiences of ridicule and rejection in her critically acclaimed autobiography written in Bengali, Ami Keno Charal Likhi, that reveals the nuanced levels of her existence as a Dalit woman on the individual as well as the collective planes. The study of Ami Keno Charal Likhi underlines the complications in women's identity formation constituted by the three intersectional categories, caste, gender, and citizenship, as distinct from the exclusive categories of woman and Dalit, underpinning the continuity of casteism in Bengal. Charal experiences a life which is marked by multiple displacements as a Dalit, a woman, and a refugee. The isolation of Dalits in remote rehabilitation camps highlights the perpetuation of the burden of untouchability through ages. For instance, she recounts that in Calcutta, upper caste and Dalit refugees were segregated on either side of the street. Since partition impacted the survival of Dalit women in a critical way, the feminization of poverty becomes evident in the lives of the untouchable Dalit female refugees who were bartered for money. The whole area in Nadia district was populated with thousands of jobless displaced people who later developed slums. Most of them were eventually involved in unscrupulous activities such as black marketing, theft, and burglary. On the pretext of giving work, women were trafficked and parceled to other states. Sometimes girls from poor families were sent away with married men from distant places in lieu of nominal money. Her own relative was trapped in a similar way, and later the family had announced that the girl was lost. Kollani writes, and I quote, "Each of their life is a history," unquote. The widows were identified by their husband's name, and they would seek shelter in homes other than their own. In the village, extramarital and incestuous relations along with polygamy were readily accepted. Women would mutely bear the brunt of such disrespectful relations and continue with their marriage. The onset of menstruation after marriage for girls who were victims of child marriage was a cause for celebration, with sweetmeat and play in the mud, which was referred to as their second marriage. The life of child widows was extremely painful as they hardly had a place in their own families and were forced to work. One such widow, along with her own son, lived in Charal's home during the 1978 flood. Charal makes reference to the Moridchapi massacre of Dalit refugees in 1979 that bears testimony to the brutality of the police meted out on Dalit women, particularly the institutionalized rape of these women in the police station. Thus, rape was used as a coercive instrument to bring a marginalized community to task. Charal relates atrocities on women such as her own sister's multiple rapes and impregnation by a relative, along with other instances of premarital pregnancies, impregnated widows, domestic violence on girls, abandonment by husbands, women's trafficking, prostitution, and lesbianism. Apart from upper caste patriarchal subordination, Dalit women endure intra-caste patriarchal cruelties. Now, I would like to particularly focus on the kind of casteist discrimination that Kalyani Thakur Charal faced in her own workplace. Charal comments on prevalent practices such as polygamy and intercaste marriages as witnessed within her community. Since intercaste or Asavarna marriages were unacceptable by the villagers, she narrates how women often became mad because of the ostracization thrust on them. Those who were chutor or carpenters would pass themselves off as kayastha, a higher caste Hindu. A few Namasudras were admitted to the school in Purbopara, where mostly high caste children went to study, and they treated the low caste students as outcasts. Her sisters, who studied in a premier girls' school, would claim that high caste girls were their friends. While describing a teacher who was a pure Brahmin, she notes that he was haughty and behaved as though he was doing a favor to the Namasudra students. Incidentally, she once recited Tagore's poem Brahman and was much praised. Later, she presented Tagore's poetry at different platforms as a mark of protest. On one occasion, her teacher, Oshim Babu, asked for the meaning of a part of the hukka, to which none of the students could respond. The teacher had commented that they were all, quote unquote, Saheber Bacha, or Sahib's children, which Charal considered to be an insult, accusing their genealogy and questioning their birth. Charal alludes to the case of Chuni Kotal, who belonged to the Lodha Shobor community in Gohaldihi village, Midnapur, West Bengal. Born in 1965, Chuni Kotal pursued an MSc program despite insurmountable impediments on her way, but unfortunately she could not fulfill her dream as she committed suicide in 1992, supposedly due to casteist oppression. Charal expatiates on how politicians continue to keep the Dalits in darkness through illiteracy, and consequently, the Dalits are not conscious of their rights. She observes that Dalit activists understand politics, that is for the control over the economy, but the misappropriation of government funds should be clearly known to them. She has drawn attention of higher officials in her own office in the Indian Railways, because of which she had to endure terrific pressure from several quarters, and I quote, "The way pressure was being created on me, as a result of which I have said to many that very easily they will find another Chuni Kotal," unquote. Charal elaborates in great detail about the workplace harassment she had to tolerate in a government office for years together, and I quote, "The folks like De Babu and Bhattacharji Babu whispered, 'Which caste?' I loudly said, 'Charal.' Suddenly, upon hearing this answer, they were stunned, because before this, they were not used to listening to such an answer of publicly professing one's caste that they used as an abuse," unquote. Charal's parents did not remember the date of her birth, and the head teacher of her school had documented her birthday as 1st August. She heard the story of her birth from her father, who had mentioned that she was born because of her mother's desire, and had she been born a few days later, then the baby would have been a boy. She was made to wear boys' clothes most of the times, and she describes her demeanor to be masculine. Her mother suffered from depression after the death of 2 sons, and she was made to wear talismans to evade ill luck. Her father removed those talismans and treated her through care and affection. Charal is one among 5 children, and no one was happy after her birth because she was born after 4 children, a daughter, a dark daughter. As a child, she performed household chores and helped in the fields, even carrying heavy weight on her head. The Pakka houses were owned by upper caste inhabitants such as Brahmins, Kayasthas, and others who were the original residents of the place. The rest of the occupants were Namasudras. It was an unwritten law that people of 2 castes lived on opposite sides. The Namasudras, or lower caste people, inhabited the grounds and swamps and did agricultural work as a means of their sustenance. Since Charal's home was close to the swamp, the place was called Bilpara, Bil meaning swamp, for which she felt an inferiority complex. Those who were originally lower caste residents of West Bengal, they marginalized the Namasudras who lived in Bilpara. Charal's intimate sense of association with the Adhar Bill was akin to some magical attraction. There has been hardly any infrastructural change in her place of birth, even after 40 years when she revisited her village, Bagula, in Nadia district. She throws light on the lives of hapless women whom she met during her subsequent visits. Widows, a mother of 7 daughters, women slum dwellers, and a TB patient abandoned by her husband, among others. With reference to women's work in the village that was synonymous with festivity, she states that women's homes and lives are still vulnerable, unstable. And I quote, "Women build homes on sand," unquote. She realizes that she is in a much better position than her peers. Their deprivation and sense of loss is far greater than hers. Most of them were uneducated and dropouts from school. A few of them repent that Charal continues to live the life of a single woman. Many of her generation were admitted to the night classes of Sarva Siksha Avigyan, but women studied in the light of the hurricane lamp, and most of them became dropouts later on. Women used to commit suicides by hanging from trees or drinking Folidol, often due to family feud or other reasons. Home remedies were used to cure them, and most of them would die due to the lack of treatment. These dead bodies were wrapped and tied to a bamboo stick and carried like a carcass. For instance, Charal connects these incidents with the ones in present times, like the carrying of a dead body by the police in Lalgarh. Now, I try to establish the relationship between the rights of citizenship and partition as exemplified in Charal's writing. Charal explodes the myth behind the 2003 Citizenship Bill and later the exhibitionism before Boroma of Thakurnagar at Esplanade, Kolkata on 26 December 2010, when political leaders avowed to protect the rights of the quote-unquote outsiders within. She recounts that some migrants from Bangladesh had managed to build houses in the lowlands and the outskirts of the village. The ones who came later to settle were even more destitute and lacked all resources. Her relatives who had traveled from the Far East continuously attempted to familiarize their children with the places of the East. Her father narrated stories, and she recognized the repeated mention of the rivers Madhumati and Padda in those narratives. She took imaginary flights across these rivers, and her fanciful tour became more evident during the 1971 flood and the independence of Bangladesh, when she observed mass exodus followed by the consequent struggle for survival in temporary shelters. Her father would indulge in comparisons between the two places, the lost home in Bangladesh and the new host nation, India. He never returned to Odesh, not even to revisit his own place, as he nursed a deep hatred for the partition. Charal's family helped the displaced relatives who had relocated from the east. Those who had returned came back being more impoverished. A hay-thatched roof, mud-baked floor, and the bare minimum amenities for survival were all that Charal's family possessed. Her father had migrated from Bangladesh once in 1948 and again in 1954, and the place in which he had settled on the west was a jungle. The way Bengali was spoken at home reflected the dialectical influence of the language, which was spoken in the district Jashore. Re-evaluating the losses in her life, Charal introspects, and I quote, "Like this, from small losses to many big ones, I don't feel sad. Who knows if I have told the truth," unquote. Charal continued her studies through the scholarship she had earned in school. She believed that by a divine will, she was thrown out of the orbit to pursue a writing career. Both her parents toiled extensively to fend for their children and support their education. Her father was determined to provide education to his children and would say, and I quote, "To give education to the children, you must beg if necessary," unquote. He did not have the capacity to fulfill their desires, so Charal realized his situation and had nominal needs. Her father was an exception, as he never perpetuated violence on her mother and would forbid other men in the community who battered their wives. He strongly believed in the equality of the sexes, and Charal was brought up as a quote-unquote manush, meaning human, and not quote-unquote me manush, meaning woman. When Charal's elder brother secured a job after completing marine engineering, their condition improved suddenly. Foreign clothes and perfumes flooded the house. The failure of her younger brother, who could not pursue academics seriously, financial scarcity at home, and the madness of her sister impacted her mother so deeply that she eventually committed suicide, having borne the burden of penury and deprivation throughout her life. The younger brother had left home for Uttar Pradesh to pursue Ayurveda as a profession, but lost his mental health, being unsuccessful in the course. Her father resigned from the job of a night guard on his elder son's request, and the whole family ultimately faced scarcity and debts. Charal has had her share of personal trauma. She has been a lifelong caregiver to her ailing elder sister who had a failed marriage, suffered from mental disorders, and even cancer, finally succumbing to death. Her brother's suicidal attempt, her father's illness, her mother's death when she was very young, and her own unrequited relationships and the resultant depression. Charal narrates, and I quote, "Those teardrops have not dried yet. I have cried for the major part of my life," unquote. She maps her self transformation in the autobiography thus, and I quote, "Through the plain, simple, rustic eyes, I discerned the loopholes of the world, and by struggling, that coy, weepy, touch me not girl has turned into an angry, fiery, rough and tough one," unquote. I come to the concluding section of my paper, where I quote from an interview that Kolani Thakur Charal had given. This interview has been archived in the Flinders University. This is a very, very significant aspect, which states that her narrative is not only a personal one, but it is a collective autobiography. My narrative generally narrates the life of a child who is born and brought up in any Dalit village. This is not my autobiography only, but a collective narration of the autobiographies of all Dalit women of our society. It's a collective discourse of our society. In the introduction to her autobiography, Charal focuses on her agenda to counter the hegemonic Brahmanism and, of course, patriarchy. She desires to establish an equitable, egalitarian society for all, for which she persistently strives against the stream to continue her activism. She concludes her book on a positive note by reporting about a workshop in 2012 in Pondicherry, convened by Sparrow Women's Archive, to assemble 12 Dalit women writers from 6 different states in India. Her writing holds great promise for the future of Dalit literature and reflects exemplary courage for women writers. Charal admits, and I quote, "In so many aspects of life, I'm struggling this way. There is no support like my father's, and I haven't learned to swim in this world," unquote. She was encouraged by her father to undertake daring enterprises. As a child, she would cross the swamp by rowing a paddy field boat. In the narrative, specific years are mentioned in relation to familial events to situate them against the socio-political backdrop. Charal ascribes the role of destiny to the course of events and their consequences in her life. In the midst of the ramifications in her retelling, she informs the reader about what she will write next and moves to the following sections. Despite all the digressions, she writes in a language shorn of all flamboyancy and lends cogency to the narrative by the sheer flow of tragic events in her life. She attempts to infuse humor at rare moments to lighten the severity of tragic incidents interspersed throughout the narrativization. She states, and I quote, "My village, neighboring villages, I don't consider all these to be only mine. It feels like ours. This Atma Katha is not mine. It is all of theirs, my contemporaries in the village." Charal points at the erasure of Dalit voices in academia and activism and resists such amnesia by carving not only her own but also a collective identity in her autobiography. In the narrative, she weaves the lives of other Dalit women, such as her grandmother, mother, and sister, stringing the selves through a shared trauma. The application of intersectionality to the case of women of color incorporates the materiality, discursivity, and structurality along with their lived experiences. Emanating from the basis of marginalization, such a theorization recognizes the epistemological importance of social position and lived experience. Since identity formation and social stratifications are mutually constitutive rather than additive, the relevance of intersectionality in the Indian context, especially in the case of Dalit women, is not an adage, but the starting point for a much-needed epistemic development of a marginalized community. This paper establishes that Kolani Thakur Charal's writing, both political and literary, has impacted the cultural fabric of Bengal in a substantive way by portraying oppression at the intersection. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a wonderful paper. This has been a wonderful deliberation. So many things, so many new things to learn for us, actually. Uh, I would request if there are any questions from the side of the listeners, they may unmute or they may put their questions in the chat box. Any question or any observation? If anyone want to share anything, they can unmute and ask.
Does anyone wish to ask something related to the subject, or even if it is remotely related, it will do? No, I think
I would absolutely be happy to address questions.
They are too spellbound to question you, probably, as we all are.
Oh, I hope it is not the other way. I only hope that.
It is not the other way. We have
in the
a question.
chat box,
I'll let Saket take it up.
In the chat box, I can find the question. There is Sayyid Zara Hassan. She's asking, my question to you is, what was the struggle of Dalit women towards education because of low caste or untouchability? How they can educate themselves?
Absolutely. In fact, this has been a major deterrent
Zara can
in the
unmute and
entire.
ask her question, I think. She has been unable
Yes,
to type
yes,
it well.
absolutely, absolutely.
So Zara, I think you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. My question is Saket sir already asked. So this is my question. As my perception, because of education or studies, I just want to know about this.
Yes, I think this has been a major deterrent in the upliftment of Dalit women because the burden of untouchability, the fact they were women, while Dalit men had more access to education, women were always left behind. And, the founders of the Matua faith, that is the Matua community, Harichand Thakur and his son Guruchand, they took up extensive enterprises to educate the Matuas. And what we see that this has been a very, very progressive community who eventually became financially independent by practicing several self-reliant occupations. And there were these informal night classes which would be taken up in the villages. But, any access to formal education was denied to them for a very, very long time. Like in Kalyani Thakur Charal's text, we find the reference to the Sarva Siksha Avigyan. But she also underscores that how these women became dropouts because of the demand of their families and a lot of prejudices against women accessing education. So I think education has been a factor because of which much of these Dalit women could not come to the forefront. And it is only a recent phenomena that we see that through political positions, through administrative positions, and the vote bank, which has been encashed by the majority parties, that education and its access is being given to this community. I hope I have been able to address your question, Zara.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other question? Okay, I think there are no more questions. So, sir, can we move ahead?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. So, thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful deliberation. Now, further, I'd like to call upon Professor A.K. Das, sir, to deliver the vote of thanks. Das, sir.
Thank you, Saket. Am I audible to you? Saket,
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, yes, sir.
We had a very insightful lecture today, and a very pertinent topic has been discussed threadbare. Dalit literature is gaining grounds and it is evolving, and that is a good symptom. One observation I would like to make out to today's guest, Dr. Saptaparna Roy, that she has mentioned about different uh, literary writings which afford the rights of the Dalits to be at par with the mainstream populace. But then the writings that are sympathetic towards Dalit, even there are some movies also which have spoken, if not vociferously, but with undertones. This is a good symptom that things are changing for the better. So it is not all bleak as it had been long, long ago. Even in the long time back, as you have rightly mentioned, ma'am, one Tagore's poem that you have mentioned, Brahman, where the last line is, "O Brahman naho tumi tato, tumi dijottam, tumi sotto kulo jato," means a man is not born high or low. It is his character, his mindset that makes him so. So all these literary writings are pointing out towards a good thing that is going to happen. It may take some time because, human beings are a sum total of animality and rationality. And once you find authority, then it corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is there, that will be there. But apart from these constraints, things are moving, and we may have to wait for some time, but things are bound to change. It was a very insightful session, ma'am. You have spoken on a very contemporary topic, which is of utmost importance to us as academicians, as well as for our students. And I think our students have been very much enlightened on this topic, and they may find interest in studying more and more about Dalits in different literary works. And then I think they will also contribute in amelioration of their plights. Ma'am, you have spoken in such a lucid manner and in such a plain manner that there was no ambiguity, no doubt left as to what you wanted to convey, and it has gone down well with the audience that are present there today. We have been here for about 1 hour, and we have never been bored. We are feeling that more and more things come, and more things we will take into us, and we'll try to contribute to this noble cause of ameliorating the conditions of the Dalit. Thank you so much, ma'am, to accept our invitation and to enlighten our students as well as us and all the people who are present there to listen to you. I, on behalf of, this is a formal thanks that I'm offering to you. I, on behalf of the Department of English, Karim City College, and the management of the Karim City College, on behalf of the principal of Karim City College, I thank you from the core of my heart. And we are looking forward to your visit sometime to this place where we can see you, we can interact with you in person. Thank you very much, ma'am. And I also thank all the students, all the academic fraternity, and other members of the audience who have been present here and whose presence have enabled us to make this event a success. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Dash, for your observation. And of course, for summing up my lecture in such a lucid way. I'm truly indebted to the Department of English, Karimsittif College. I consider this to be an honor and privilege to be able to address the members of faculty and also all the students. I wish them all the best wishes possible from my end for a very, very successful academic stint in their lives ahead. And I wish the department all the very best for continuing with more and more courses. As I heard from Boshudhara that this course is running successfully, the PG department is running successfully for the past 1 year. So I hope that your department flourishes really well, sir. It is indeed an honor to be able to address all of you today.
Thank you so
ma'am.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boshudhara, thank you very much for introducing me to your department, and I really look forward to going